morning. It's Wednesday. Oh my goodness, what even day is it? It's the 3rd of November and it's Blast and a Half. I'm Lauren Greif from Portfolio Rocket. And yes, you guessed it, sidekick of the day, Reno Perry, celebrity, woo, 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 on LinkedIn, who literally broke the internet with his post on small talk. And that's what we're here to talk about today is small talk. And Reno, before we dive into this, please introduce yourself. You don't have to give the backstory of your name, although it's very juicy. So follow up with him later. And tell us about yourself and Wiseful.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll start with a little bit of small talk, for everybody here. My name is Reno Perry. I'm the founder of a company called Wiseful, which is a career advancement platform focused on early to mid-career talent, but we do work with a lot of folks in terms of helping them land their next role or their dream job, which is a really big focus. And some folks may know I like to post content consistently on LinkedIn with just career advice and tips on how to help people in interviews or in networking situations or conversing with folks to help develop relationships, to help advance their career. A lot of that's a really big focus of what I like to do. And I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And so the title of this Blast and a Half is Small Talk and Why It's a Big Deal. And so I think that, what we were talking about prior to going live and just, I think the general feeling around small talk is that small talk is kind of like superficial kind of filler, right? There's a Yiddish word that's called Baba Misa. It basically means like a lot of stuff, right? Yeah. And so I'm curious why small talk, gets the bad rap, gets minimized.
Yeah, this is an interesting topic. I think small talk really gets a bad rap because a lot of people have a negative connotation of small talk from previous experiences. So when we think about small talk, and I think I mentioned this in my post, one of the first thing that comes to mind is really this dreary conversation about the weather and how often people go, "Hey, how's the weather over there?" And it becomes so predictable to the point where it's not interesting. You know it's coming. It's very surface level, and there's not a lot of deep thought around a conversation about the weather. Or you think about a conversation you might have with a colleague at work where they'll bring up, "Hey, how was your weekend?" "Great. How was yours?" "Fantastic." And then you guys go on your way. It starts to get in this predictable pattern where you think of small talk and you think about those moments that keep replaying over and over again. And I think that in those situations, it gets a really bad reputation. But in situations where you're networking or you're interviewing, small talk is actually a really great way to help open things up with those individuals that you're talking to.
Right. So, I love what you said about those repetitive conversations, those trite kind of things that you just hear all the time. How was the weather? How was your weekend?
Yeah.
Like just a lot of recycled conversation. And then it becomes kind of stigmatized as it's meaningless. Right? It's just like nobody's really listening to, nobody really cares about whether it's gray and cloudy or sunny or this or that, because where is that conversation going to go from there?
Yeah,
So,
exactly right.
So now that we know that, it kind of gets this bad rap, what's the opposite side of this? What's the value? What's the meat behind what small talk can do, be it a job seeker, an interview, somebody who is, you bump into the street, onto the street and you haven't seen them for a long time. How do you use this before you get the job? And then even as you are within a company and use it in its more productive form?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the way people need to approach small talk is not the end goal. You really don't want to go into the conversation and say, "You know what, I'm going to just talk about the weather with this person and find out what's going on in Seattle." That is not the goal of small talk. The goal of small talk is it's really a pathway to much deeper conversations or big talk, right? You can consider it that.
Well, I love
And
that.
Yeah, it's an easy way to approach a conversation without diving headfirst into really serious topics. Because I think what you find if you start talking to somebody and you start coming in with some heavy topics around, well, what strategies are you implementing in here? Like, what are your deepest fears, or what are you looking to achieve in life? A lot of these questions are really big questions for somebody to take on before they even know you, before they've had a chance to understand who you are as a person. And so small talk is a way to help build up to maybe some of those deeper conversations. And once you get to those deeper conversations, that's how you start to form a relationship with somebody, a genuine relationship that you can use in networking situations, or if you're in a company trying to advance and develop relationships with key leaders or colleagues. That's one of the ways. Small talk is a way to break through to get to that relationship.
Absolutely. I like this comment over here from an anonymous LinkedIn user. Keep
Ooh, anonymous.
small talk on big things. How's your marathon training coming along? How's your TED Talk prep coming along? So, I see that we have a lot of amazing Reno Perry fans. Woo woo! Tegan and Niatu, Craig Davis, Michelle Ferguson. Good morning. And
Good
so,
morning, everybody. Yeah, love to
yes,
see these folks.
I know all our LinkedIn peeps. So I really like what you were talking about as the value of the small talk actually is the catalyst for the value and the quality of the bigger talk later on. So if
100%.
you're
Yeah.
opening up with something superficial, it's hard to necessarily jump into something that's meatier. It's not impossible, but it's not going to have the same depth and weight.
Yeah.
Versus if you ask a good small talk or make some good small talk in the beginning and then move into it. So what qualifies a higher value of small talk? Like if you're going to
Yeah.
go through the Perry prioritization of what is like, that's low level and that's really great level. What might that be?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this in the post. I was poking a little bit of fun of how typical small talk starts, and a lot of times, what we find are people like to ask about the weather, right? And I think every single person has done it. I've done it, and it's really surface level that has been played over and over again in those conversations. And to me, that is the last thing I would ever use in small talk.
Okay, so I'm using meh
Met,
as,
met,
as meh is small talk is small talk low level, right? Weather.
Low level small talk, right? Yeah. So everybody does it. Everybody knows that's kind of the go-to. There's not a lot of research, or there's not a lot of depth to that, right? So next level of small talk would really be um, doing research on the individual that you're talking to try and understand, are there some commonalities in their background? Is there something, even if it's not commonalities, is there something interesting about this individual that I think is interesting that I could bring up? Um, and a LinkedIn profile is a great way to do that. So if you're coming into, let's say, a situation that I was referencing in the post, if you're walking into an interview, ideally you have an understanding of who you're interviewing with. You can go to their LinkedIn profile and understand, is there a point of commonality? Did they go to a similar school? Did they go to a school that maybe was maybe was a rival in our conference? And I can harp on them about that. Is there a career path that was really interesting? So it might be that person started in one industry and then they completely pivoted to a new industry, and maybe you're someone trying to do the same thing. And so maybe they gave a TED talk and it's on their LinkedIn profile, or there's an article that they wrote or a blog post. So use some of those different pieces as ammunition for deeper level small talk that you can bring up in these conversations.
Okay. So Matt is like, repetitive, low level conversation, whether, things that are commonplace. Point
Yep.
of commonality, and I like to use, this came from Amy Vola, so I take no credit, but I do use it a lot. Show me you know me, right? A little
Yeah.
show me you know me, get involved in what that person has on their LinkedIn, do a little research, Google them, find out if they've been on a podcast, and see where there's something that you can bring to light that says to them, hey, this person, cares about me. They're on to me. There's something here outside of a generic piece of information. Right now, it's specific to you, Reno. Like, what was the first question I asked you when you came on this before in the green room?
What's going on with your name? Why did your
Your
parents name
dog.
you Reno?
Your
Oh, my
dog.
dog.
I wanted
Yeah,
to
where's
know
my dog?
where Reno's dog was, because the last time I met with Reno, he had his golden retriever on Zoom, and I was like, "Where's your dog?" Right? So I know he's a dog lover. I'm a dog lover. So there we go.
She doesn't like me anymore, so she's
Oh,
in the other room right now.
She's on hiatus.
Yeah.
And so the next level after higher grade, what is the the trifecta, or the gold medal of small talk?
Oh, the gold medal of small talk. I think I mean, at that point, I would consider that starting to get into bigger talk. Because if you really start to understand um, what's going on in somebody's personal life, I think if you could start to broach those topics a little bit more and start to peer inside, hey, what's actually going on in your week? How are you actually feeling about things? That starts to get into that deeper level conversation. So you could say that small talk, but start to approach big talk. So I like, you have weather, you have points of commonality, and then you start to get into personal sentiment and feeling that's genuine. I think is starting to break through into that bigger talk barrier.
Can you give me an example of that? I know you just did, but like something that would be a personal sentiment about, or something that is, you are riding a line, because you're not going to get too personal, right? You're not going to be like,
for sure.
oh, so how do you really feel about, the fact that you lost your job? I mean, you're not going to start with that. That would be like, ooh, a little too much. But what would be like a personal sentiment that would ride the line between small talk to open up for bigger talk?
Yeah, I mean, I think any questions around what somebody's thought process was, what they were
Oh, I
thinking.
like that.
So if you ask, that's a really interesting career you had. You went from manufacturing to now working in SaaS. What really prompted you to make that move? What was going on at the time that made you want to say, hey, this is not the industry for me, but now I wanted to pivot to this industry. So instead of saying, recognize it, oh, you made this move, how did you do it? What was driving it? And then that starts to open up different kinds of answers, where you might get into, I was working in a job that really didn't have growth opportunities, or I had to think about my family, and there was earnings potential that I was considering doing that, or I was in a situation where I worked at a company and it was a toxic environment, and I was really looking for somewhere that appreciated who I was and what I brought to the table. So when you start to get it, that's what I mean. You start to get into the reasons why somebody does something, that sentiment, that feeling. That's sort of the third level of a lot of different pieces of conversation. And that's why I say, as you start to get into that, then you're starting to cross over into maybe some
That's a
bigger
great
topics.
bridge. That's a great bridge. I like listening to the rationale. Why did you do this? How did you do this? A dear friend of mine, Brendan Kamarosamy, always says, ask how, not wow, right? Ask how, not gush away, like I did in the beginning of the show, right?
I like that.
Get curious. And I also love what Niatu had to say about an article that he wrote about connection through curiosity. I agree with Reno, and find that it's so important to lead with what you really are sparked to, and learn more about a networking contact. So connecting through curiosity, that's just a great kind of banner for all of this. I think that that's fantastic, to come with like a probing or curiosity mindset, so that you're helping them to, you're setting up a stage or a framework for them to be able to share. I often am curious within any kind of networking conversation where the bulk of the conversation should lie, as you, the person who has asked to meet, versus the person who is, let's just say, the executive or the person that you've invited for the networking? Any thoughts on that, just in terms of the balance between who's talking and the amount of small talk that gets, I mean, obviously not scientifically, but just some ideas?
Yeah, I think you said it in your wording. It should ideally be a balance, because what you really want to avoid is a situation where it's an interrogation and you get to a point where you come in and you say, you know what, I'm really gonna just come in with my small talk and I'm gonna ask all these questions. And if they're not responding, that's not, you don't necessarily want to be in that situation. So making sure that there's balance in the conversation is really important as well. And asking some of those questions about, and I think on the other side of it too, is if somebody is not willing to engage with you in the same kind of way, that may also signal to balance your question, the rate you're asking questions, right? So I think we were talking earlier. I think it's important that you try to match the energy and what somebody's giving you from the other side. And
Right.
you may have a thought about how you think the conversation is going to go, but it's really important to, I think we were talking about earlier, use that emotional intelligence to understand, okay, is this person opening up after I'm asking questions? Or are they still a little bit reserved? Are they not willing to engage with me at the level that I am? And that'll sort of be your indicator to dial it back or continue down the path, depending on what kind of energy and what they're reciprocating.
Right. So completely agree. You're going to have to read the room or the person or the environment that you're in, because
Yep.
we were talking, a lot of people have been talking about, ooh, fourth quarter, this is a good time to capitalize on people being in the holiday spirit and being in a good mood. This may be an absolutely prime time to offer up some, valuable small talk, because people are starting to think about it, and to not make it trite. What's on
Yeah.
your wish list, or something that is an opportunity to open up. What was the best gift that you got last year and why, or something that doesn't just say, are you excited about the holidays? Like,
Yeah.
you're going to get either I hate it or I love it, right?
Yeah, and to your point there too, is if a lot of times people will reciprocate or ask back some questions you ask. Hey, how are you? Good. How are you? Or how was your holiday? Oh, it was great. How was your holiday? Oh, it was fantastic. And so to avoid those one-word answers that immediately shuts down the conversation, to use the analogy, you can give somebody a bone, throw them a bone, or give them some bait a little bit to continue the conversation, and that could be an extended answer response to that question. So, hey, how are you? Oh, it could be better. Things were kind of crazy this morning on the road. I mean, there was construction everywhere. There was a crash on the side of it. My kids made me late because they needed to help with XYZ. And now you're starting to open up a little bit more into different topics of conversation that the other person can latch onto. Because if you just say, hey, things are good, what that doesn't really tell me anything. I have nothing to work with if I'm on the other side. At least if you say, hey, things could be better, I was doing all this crazy stuff, I may relate to something that you just said, and that's another point of conversation that can continue to the engagement.
Totally. So I want to talk about this next question, which is, and this is inevitable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think that, I don't know, I'm going to guess maybe 50% of the people love networking and think it's amazing and it's relationship building and all that great stuff and invest in their personal capital. Other people are the exact polar opposite. I hate it. It's labor intensive. I'm not a fan. So what would you say to people that are in the camp of, like, I can listen to you guys talk about networking and small talk all day long, but I'm just not comfortable with it.
Yeah, I mean it's a topic that comes up, especially if you're someone who's introverted. You may shy away from trying to talk to people, and I always tell people, if small talk is not just the act of talk or asking questions. A lot of it is mindset driven. So before
Mhm.
you even enter an interview or a networking conversation, you really have to reframe it as not dreaded small talk, but this is a path to building a better relationship with somebody. This is a path to putting things at ease for me and the other person. This is a path to understanding who I'm talking to instead of those negative connotations that we talked about earlier. Oh, I'm going to get these questions that I really aren't a fan of, or I don't know how to respond to these questions. So I think at the beginning, it's really about mindset shift going in to say, this is not going to be the way that I think about small talk, but it has all these benefits that I can help me as an introvert or somebody who's maybe a little bit shy. And that's really one of the benefits that I don't know we've mentioned enough about small talk is it's actually a benefit of having that conversation or that banter back and forth is that it puts not just the other individual at ease, but it also puts you at ease because you eliminate a lot of the unknown about who is this person? Will they respond to me? Will they accept me? The moment you engage in small talk, that starts to dissipate. And so, and this is actually proven from having, psychologists and folks who study interactions, social scientists. It's a great way to put both parties at ease. And I think the other thing too is if you're somebody who is a little bit shy about going in the deep end with conversation with people, small talk is actually something that is more achievable if you're somebody who's an introvert or a little bit shy, because you don't have to jump into really heavy topics right away. It's okay to, if you're somebody who's a little bit shy and introvert, to start with, "Hey, how was your day?" Or, "Oh, what did you have for lunch earlier?" Those topics are okay to bring up without having to jump into some of the deeper stuff that I know a lot of introverts or people who might be a little shy. That's a tall order for those people.
I love this point about putting both parties at ease. And for anybody who is an introvert, from the research that I've read, the real advantage of introverts is that they're excellent listeners, notably excellent listeners. So
Yeah, they're
that's a
very
really important
curious. Yeah,
part of small talk too, because you're even though you're not talking, you're still allowing the other person to share and being present and fully engaged in what they have to say is also a great way to give permission for that person to continue to talk and expound. And we
yeah. I
also,
mean,
people are talking about themselves, they're happy, right?
yeah, 100%. I mean, that's well-known research that introverts tend to be a little bit more curious people. They may not be as open about talking about themselves and what they do, which is fine. That's a good opportunity to listen and ask questions to other people. So I think there's also an opportunity where you don't have to be doing that as an introvert. You can ask questions to the other individual, and like you said or alluded to earlier, people will love talking about themselves a lot of times, and you can use that to your advantage as an introvert to really be curious and ask some questions of the other party.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all heard a number of these stories where you're the person that's not really talking, and the other person said, "Wow, it was great talking to you." Because they've been
Yeah,
talking about themselves the whole time, but they've had such a good time. And sometimes, there's important to be able to give people the space to do that, and also to be able to have a balance, right?
yeah,
Reading that room, knowing when to allow that person to continue and also be participatory without being an interrogator. It sounds like small talk is like this really easy thing, but it's actually layered with so many other components that I think are so critical, especially either in the early part of job seeking, like trust,
yeah,
credibility, rapport. We talk all the time about know, like, and trust. People hire people who are people that they know, like, and trust. And
yep,
part of the small talk opportunity is to establish that.
yep, 100%. It's the pathway to building the relationship. um, you're like we talked about earlier, small talk's not the end goal of
Mhm.
what you're doing, and for you to really break through and develop a relationship, instead of just keeping things surface level. Small talk is going to get you there because you can't dive in and start talking about deep topics with people. It's
Ooh,
not something we're accustomed to.
I want to field this question. This is a great one. Andy York, thank you. As an introvert, how can you tell if an extrovert is actually listening? So, Reno.
Yeah, Andy, that's a really good question here. So I I hesitate. I mean, I have to give pause with this one here, because I think you're going to find a lot of people that you talk to are uh, maybe not truly understanding, but they're just listening to respond in some
Mhm.
cases back to you. So you've probably heard that before. Um, and that's one of those situations, Andy, where it's hard to call somebody out if they're not listening to what you say. And I think I've been guilty of this sometimes as well. I mean, I have to admit that when I'm talking to somebody, sometimes I'm not picking up on every single detail, and sometimes I may be listening to respond a lot of times because I'm actually nervous about what I'm going to say. And so I think it's one of those delicate balances to say, hey, if an extrovert's not listening, how can I call them out or see if they're actually listening? That's one of those challenging social or interactions about social or challenging pieces of social interactions where um, there's a lot more at play than just saying, hey, this person isn't listening to me. So I mean, I don't have a perfect I don't have a perfect answer for you. I think there's going to be situations where on both sides, you're not going to have somebody who's fully listening and engaging. But for you as an individual, I think in that case, you could be the individual who asks questions of the other individual and really pay attention to what they're doing. Because what you're still going to do is leave an impression with them if you're doing that.
Absolutely.
And I think in that case, you can't control the way that they listen or engage with you, but you can leave the impression with them. You can ask the questions. You can be the one who's more curious as the introvert, and leave that lasting impression with them.
Oh, that's such a great answer to flip it around, right? And I also really like this add in from Virginia. Good morning, Virginia. I was
Hey,
taught
Virginia.
for introverts related to small talk in group settings. Approach groups of 3. Larger than that is overwhelming. Smaller than that, you risk interrupting a private conversation. So excellent idea to test this out in a little bit of a 3-way mini group, to be able to practice. And I think that that's really a huge opportunity too, right?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. If I think back to some of the in-person networking events I've gone to, um, strategically, I mean, I should say a lot of times instinctively, I'll go and do that because I didn't want to approach maybe a group of two and interrupt a private conversation. And it's been much easier if I think about some of the past interactions to break in to groups of three where it's a little bit more welcoming and it's easier for you to insert yourself into the conversation. So I love that, Virginia. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I would say practice. There's lots and lots and lots and lots of opportunities to practice. You can even practice if you want to on a Zoom with 2 other people, right? I mean,
Yeah.
these things are really portable and applicable, and we can all up level our small talk to improve the quality of the larger conversation, the deeper conversation.
Yeah.
So I love that. Andy York says, thank you. Being proactive can definitely help. And then from Mr. Gaby Leal, thank you so much. So Reno Perry, what is the most interesting or intriguing thing that you have learned in all the conversations you've had meeting new people? I mean,
Oh, wow. That is
no,
a question.
no pressure or anything.
Yeah, that is a real question. I think the most interesting thing for me has been just how, and I actually don't have to think about it because I notice this theme happens a lot with everyone I talk to, is when you start to get into the deeper conversation, you realize that people are more vulnerable than you think. And what I mean by that is it's easy to make a judgment about somebody when you
Mm,
look at their LinkedIn profile and you see, oh, okay, they're a VP of this, or they're a founder of this, or they look like they're doing really well in their career. And when you actually get into the deeper conversation, uh, you recognize that there's a lot more to what's going on. Is people have aspirations and goals that they haven't met yet. People have frustrations about things. And when you start to get to that level, I mean, we talk about being into people's sentiments and how they feel about things and what's their why. That's when you can really connect with people. And that's what I would say I recognize is when you can get to that layer, you realize that there's a lot more vulnerability and frustration. And I like to say just, I mean, you recognize the humanness of people when you can actually talk to them and get to that deeper level. And the moment you break through to that, you formed a connection, you formed a relationship that you don't have anywhere else. And so I think that's probably the most interesting thing is cut through the small talk, cut through the what you see on LinkedIn and social media, cut through the speeches and the articles about people, and you can really get to the core of what someone is feeling and thinking, and it's more human. And I respond to that in turn. I can be more open about what I'm feeling or going through, and that's how the relationship forms. So I think that's probably the most interesting thing is once you peel back the onion, you start to recognize there's a lot more than what you think.
I love that. Right? We're so wired and allured by what is immediately visible. And
Yeah.
we're on LinkedIn, you're on LinkedIn, we're here, we're there. Not that I'm not saying we're like celebrities or anything. I'm just saying that there's social media, and then there's what's behind the social media, or even what's behind the resume, right? I mean, the resume is a piece of paper. People don't hire paper, they hire the people. So I think that that's super important. And then lastly, this question is, what is the most underrated thing about small talk that doesn't get talked about?
Oh, Craig, always appreciate the questions and the value. Most underrated thing about small talk that doesn't get talked about. I I have to say it's probably what I alluded to earlier is that small talk is a path to big talk.
Mhm.
Um, nobody ever talks about that. Nobody ever thinks of it that way, but that's really what the goal of it is. And a lot of people think, oh, it's just here to exchange pleasantries, or it's just something that you do. But no one actually thinks, okay, well, what happens beyond that? So whenever you and anybody who's on here, when you think about small talk, or in the future when you hear it again, or if you think about going into conversations, just understand that it's not the end goal. It's a means to developing a much deeper relationship with somebody and getting into some of those more juicier topics, if you will, to really understand truly how somebody operates and what ticks in that individual.
Super fantastic. Reno Perry, where can people find you? What anything else that's coming up that they need to know? Anything with Wiseful? Bring it on.
Yeah, I mean, just I always love people who engage on LinkedIn. As you know, that's my platform of choice. So if you guys are on LinkedIn, I like to talk about topics related to small talk, conversating with people. How to some questions to ask in interviews, and taking it. Sometimes take an interesting take on that. So I would just say you can connect or follow me on LinkedIn, and would love to see anybody here engage with some topics that we post about.
Fantastic. So please, 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 you are in for such a treat. Go and follow Reno, and you will see that he is literally blowing up the platform every single day thereabouts. Like, incredible content that makes you think, and content that is always kind of offering up a mind-bending perspective. So I
Thank you, Lauren.
so appreciate you. I'm a fan. And also just want to let you know that Reno wants to do more lives, everybody. So
That's true.
a little shout out, a little, colleague love, and please include him, because what he has to say is super, super amazing and valuable. And thank you for showing up on Blast and a Half today. Have a great Wednesday, everybody, and we'll see you next week. I will not reveal the guests yet. Guests, plural. So stay tuned. All
Sounds
right. Have a
exciting.
wonderful, wonderful day, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.